The rain beat against the cracked windows of Rosie's diner like it was trying to wash away the sins of everyone inside. The neon sign outside flickered rhythmically, casting an ethereal red glow through the glass that bled across the worn counter where Mary Carter stood, wiping down the same spot for the third time. The small town of Eagle Ridge, Arizona had seen better days. So had she. The year was 1995. The American dream still existed in the minds of many, but the reality had grown harder around the edges. Small towns like this one were dying slow deaths as factories closed and young people fled to cities with promises of better futures. Only the stubborn and the stuck remained. Mary was 24 with tired eyes that seemed to belong to someone twice her age. Her faded blue uniform hung loose on her frame, evidence of meals skipped to save money for more important things. Her honey blonde hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and despite everything her smile remained genuine when she offered it to customers. That smile was getting harder to summon these days. The late-night crowd at Rosie's consisted of the regulars. Old Bill and Martha Jenkins occupied their usual corner booth, his Korea veteran cap positioned proudly on his weathered head as he stirred his decaf coffee. Martha was telling him about something their grandchildren had done, and his eyes sparkled with interest despite having likely heard the story before. At the counter sat Jimmy Hayes, a long-haul trucker with hollow cheeks who was methodically working through a piece of apple pie while scanning yesterday's newspaper. In another booth, a young mother dozed while her sleeping child used her lap as a pillow. The small television mounted in the corner played the 11 o'clock news volume turned low, something about another business closing downtown. Nobody needed to hear the details. They were living them. Rose Henderson emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. The 65-year-old woman had owned the diner for nearly 30 years, inheriting it from her husband after his heart gave out behind that very counter. Her face was a road map of wrinkles each one earned through hard work and harder times. "Mary, honey, why don't you take your break? You've been on your feet for 6 hours straight." Mary shook her head. "I'm fine, Rose. Not busy enough to need a break anyway." Rose huffed but didn't argue. She had known Mary long enough to recognize the stubborn set of her jaw. The girl worked herself too hard, but then again she had reason to. Mary's hand unconsciously moved to the pendant hanging around her neck, her fingers tracing its outline through her uniform. It was a Marine Corps medallion that had belonged to her father. He'd taught her about honor and respect and standing tall even when life tried to knock you down. Lessons she clung to now, especially since her mother's illness had started 2 years ago. The diner door swung open with a violent clang that made everyone except Bill Jenkins jump. The old veteran merely turned his head slowly toward the sound, assessing the newcomers with the calm vigilance of a man who had learned the hard way to watch for trouble. 3 men walked in their leather jackets damp from the rain, their boots tracking mud across the freshly mopped floor. The smell of beer and cigarettes entered with them, along with something harder and meaner. The atmosphere in the diner instantly changed like the air pressure dropping before a storm. The first man, clearly their leader, stood about 6 foot tall with broad shoulders and a thick neck adorned with a tattoo of barbed wire that disappeared beneath his collar. His face was flushed red, whether from the cool night air or alcohol, it was hard to tell. The other 2 flanked him like loyal attack dogs, one thin and wiry, the other stocky with a shaved head. Mary felt her stomach tighten. She recognized them. They had been in twice before, and that both times had left without paying their full bill after making comments that made her skin crawl. Rose noticed her discomfort and moved closer to the register where Mary knew she kept a baseball bat. The leader sauntered up to the counter and slammed his fist down hard enough to rattle the napkin dispenser. "Hey, sweetheart," he called out loudly, making sure everyone in the diner could hear him. "Serve us, bitch. We've been waiting all day to see that pretty face." The word echoed across the diner, shattering what little peace remained. Mary felt her cheeks burn with humiliation. The mother in the booth woke with a start and pulled her child closer. Mary took a deep breath and forced herself to remain calm. Rose had taught her that sometimes you had to swallow your pride in this job. The customer is always right, even when they're horribly wrong. Her fingers tightened around the coffee pot, her knuckles white with strain. "Of course, sir," she managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. "What can I get you?" The 3 men exchanged glances and laughed, not because she had said something funny, but because they enjoyed seeing her uncomfortable. The leader, whose name she remembered was Mark, leaned across the counter. "Coffee to start. Black like my soul." His friend snickered at this as if it were the height of wit. "And some service with a smile. You look like someone just shot your D." Mary poured 3 cups of coffee with hands that she willed not to shake. She could feel everyone watching, pretending not to. The old couple, the truck driver, the young mother, all kept their heads down, avoiding eye contact. No one wanted trouble. As she set the cups down, the wiry one reached across the counter and tugged at her apron strings. "What's your name again, darling? I want to know what to call out later." His friends erupted in laughter. Mary stepped back out of his reach. My name is Mary, sir, she said evenly. Will there be anything else? Mark snapped his fingers an inch from her face, making her flinch. Yeah, extra sugar, and I don't mean another coffee. More laughter. Mary grabbed the sugar dispenser and placed it before him with more force than necessary, a small act of defiance. As she turned to walk away, Mark called out, Hey, I know you now. You're Jim Carter's kid, aren't you? Your daddy and I had a disagreement once. He thought he was better than me, learned his lesson though, didn't he? Mary froze. Her father had been dead for 5 years. A bar fight gone wrong, they said. She had never known the details, only that he hadn't started it, but had finished it, taking a knife to the ribs in the process. She turned slowly, feeling something cold and hard settle in her chest. You didn't know my father, she said quietly. Mark's smile widened, revealing teeth stained by tobacco. Sure I did. Marine who thought he was hot shit. Always talking about honor and respect. Fat lot of good it did him in the end. Mary felt her eyes burn not from fear now, but from a potent mixture of grief and rage. She wanted to scream to throw the coffee pot at his smug face, but her mother's image flashed in her mind. Her mother lying in the hospital bed, frail and smiling weakly, needing the expensive medication that Mary's 2 jobs barely covered. And so she swallowed her retort, turned away, and busied herself wiping down the counter again. The men continued to make comments, each one designed to cut deeper than the last. She endured it, reminding herself that her shift ended in just over an hour, and then she could go home and cry in private. The rain outside grew heavier, thunder rumbling like an angry warning from above. The sound of the television, the soft murmurs of the other customers, and the cruel laughter of Mark and his friends created a discordant soundtrack to what was becoming one of the worst nights of her life. Just when the laughter of the 3 men grew loud enough to drown out the sound of her breaking heart, the diner door creaked open again. This time it wasn't with arrogance, but with quiet, deliberate power. The kind that doesn't need to announce itself. 4 men walked in, bringing with them the scent of rain leather and the open road. They were bikers, that much was clear from their worn leather jackets and scuffed boots. But there was something different about them, something that set them apart from the likes of Mark and his friends. They entered with a calm confidence that commanded attention without demanding it. The tallest among them, a man who appeared to be in his early 60s, stood at the front. His face was weathered by years of sun and wind, with deep lines around his eyes that spoke of both laughter and hardship. A long scar ran across his right cheek, pale against his tanned skin. His hair was thick and mostly gray, cut short in a style that suggested old military habits. His eyes, a piercing blue, took in the scene before him with the quick assessment of someone trained to notice details. Behind him stood 3 other men, each with the same quiet strength in their bearing. One was a stocky African-American man with salt and pepper beard, another a leaner man with glasses and hands that looked like they knew honest work, and the third a broad-shouldered individual with kind eyes that belied his imposing frame. Mary watched as the tall man's gaze swept across the diner, pausing briefly on Old Bill, who offered an almost imperceptible nod of acknowledgement. Then his eyes landed on Mary, taking in her discomfort before shifting to Mark and his friends at the counter. Something in his expression hardened, though his demeanor remained outwardly calm. The 4 newcomers made their way to a booth near the door, removing their jackets to reveal arms muscled from years of physical labor rather than gym workouts. The tall man kept his back to the wall, his position allowing him to observe the entire diner. It was the instinctive choice of someone who had learned to never leave himself vulnerable. Mary approached their table with a fresh pot of coffee and 4 menus, grateful for the momentary escape from Mark's group. "Evening, gentlemen," she said, her professional smile returning more easily now. "Coffee to start." The tall man nodded, his eyes kind as they met hers. "Thank you, miss," he said, his voice deep and gentle. "Been riding through this storm for hours. A hot cup sounds perfect." As she poured, she noticed a faded tattoo on his forearm, partially visible beneath his rolled-up sleeve. It was the Marine Corps emblem, the same one that adorned the medallion she wore around her neck. Her hand trembled slightly, causing a few drops of coffee to splash onto the table. "I'm sorry," she said quickly, reaching for a napkin. "No harm done," the man assured her, helping her mop up the spill. As he did, his eyes caught on her necklace, recognition flashing across his features. He didn't comment on it, but something in his demeanor shifted subtly. From the counter, Mark's voice rang out. "Hey, waitress, more coffee over here. Stop fawning over to the geriatric biker gang." Mary felt her cheeks flush again. She finished pouring coffee for the 4 men and turned back toward the counter, dreading the return to Mark's vicinity. The tall biker's voice stopped her. "We're in no hurry, miss. Take your time." There was something in his tone, a quiet authority that gave her courage. She nodded gratefully and squared her shoulders before returning to the counter. As she refilled Mark's cup, he grabbed her wrist, squeezing hard enough to hurt. "I don't like being ignored," he said, his voice low and menacing. "Maybe you need the same lesson your daddy got." Mary tried to pull away, but his grip tightened. The coffee pot tilted in her other hand, hot liquid sloshing dangerously close to the rim. If it spilled on either of them, the burns would be severe. "Please let go," she said, hating the tremor in her voice. Mark's friend snickered. The one with the shaved head leaned forward. "Or what you gonna call the cops?" "In this town, sheriff's my cousin's sweetheart." Mary looked around desperately. Rose had disappeared into the back. The other customers studiously avoided looking in her direction, their faces masks of uncomfortable neutrality. This was how it always went. People looked the other way when confronted with unpleasantness. It was easier, safer. "I believe the lady asked you to let go." The voice came from directly behind her, calm and measured. Mary hadn't heard the tall biker approach, but now he stood there, his presence solid and reassuring at her back. Mark looked up, annoyance flickering across his features. "Mind your own business, old man. This doesn't concern you." The biker remained perfectly still, his voice never rising. "She's working. You are hurting her. That makes it my concern." The diner had gone completely silent. Even the rain seemed to pause momentarily. Mary could feel the tension radiating from Mark, whose face had darkened to an ugly shade of crimson. "You don't know who you're messing with." Mark spat, but his grip on Mary's wrist loosened slightly. The biker's expression didn't change. "I know exactly who I'm dealing with. I've seen your type before, men who think strength means hurting those who can't fight back." His eyes, hard as blue steel, locked onto Mark's. "I'm only going to say this once. Let her go." There was a moment where Mary thought violence would erupt. Mark's body tensed like a coiled spring, but something in the biker's steady gaze must have penetrated even Mark's alcohol-fueled bravado. With a disgusted sound, he released her wrist, shoving her arm away. Mary stumbled back a step, nearly colliding with the biker, who steadied her with a gentle hand on her shoulder before stepping to her side, positioning himself between her and the three men. Mark stood up, attempting to use his height as intimidation, but he still had to look up slightly to meet the biker's eyes. His two friends also rose, spreading out in a manner that might have seemed casual to an untrained observer, but was clearly strategic. The other three bikers had also moved without Mary noticing when. The stocky one now leaned against the jukebox, apparently studying the song selections, but positioned with a clear line of sight to Mark's wiry friend. The one with glasses had shifted to stand near the young mother and child, his body angled protectively. The broad-shouldered man stood casually by the door, effectively blocking the most direct exit. Old Bill Jenkins, she noticed, had quietly positioned Martha behind him in the booth, his weathered hand now resting on something in his jacket pocket. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Mark looked around, finally registering that the situation had shifted from 3 against 1 defenseless waitress to something far less favorable. The tall biker tilted his head slightly. "Walk away," he said softly, "and you get to keep your teeth tonight." For a long, dangerous second, it seemed like the confrontation would escalate regardless. Then Mark reached slowly into his pocket. The biker didn't flinch, didn't react outwardly at all, but something in his stance changed, becoming even more centered and balanced, ready for whatever might come. What emerged from Mark's pocket was not a weapon, but a crumpled $20 bill which he threw onto the counter. "Food tastes like shit anyway," he muttered, trying to save face. "Come on, boys, this place stinks." His two companions seemed almost relieved as they followed him toward the door. The broad-shouldered biker stepped aside to let them pass, but not so far that they didn't have to turn sideways to avoid brushing against him. As Mark passed the biker who had confronted him, he paused. "This isn't over, old man. You don't know who you're messing with in this town." The biker met his gaze evenly. "Neither do you, son. Neither do you." With a final glare, Mark and his friends stormed out of the diner, the door slamming behind them. Through the window, Mary could see them climbing into a pickup truck with oversized tires. The engine revved aggressively before the vehicle peeled out of the parking lot, spraying gravel. Silence reigned for several heartbeats. Then, like a spell breaking normal movement and sound, returned to the diner. The young mother exhaled audibly. Jimmy, the truck driver, turned back to his newspaper with a grunt. Old Bill removed his hand from his pocket and patted Martha's hand reassuringly. Mary stood frozen, the coffee pot still clutched in her white-knuckled grip. Her wrist throbbed where Mark had grabbed at red marks already forming what would become bruises by morning. The tall biker turned to her, his face softening. "You okay, sweetheart?" he asked gently. The simple kindness in his voice nearly undid her. She nodded, though her lips trembled with the effort of holding back tears. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice catching. "You didn't have to do that." He shook his head, dismissing her gratitude. "No one should have to take that kind of disrespect, not ever." Rose emerged from the kitchen, baseball bat in hand, looking around in confusion at the changed atmosphere. Her eyes fell on Mary's wrist, then darted to the bikers, uncertainty clear in her expression. "It's okay, Rose," Mary assured her quickly. "These gentlemen just helped with a situation." The tall biker extended his hand to Rose. "Tom Miller, ma'am. My friends and I were just passing through when we stopped for coffee. Hope we're not causing any trouble. Rose eyed him suspiciously for a moment before accepting his handshake. Any friend of Mary's is welcome here, she said, though her tone suggested she was reserving final judgment. Tom smiled, the expression transforming his scarred face into something warm and approachable. We'll just have some coffee and pie if you've got it, then be on our way. Rose nodded and disappeared back into the kitchen, taking the baseball bat with her. Mary gestured toward the booth where the other 3 bikers had returned. Please sit down. Coffee's on the house. Tom followed her back to the booth where his friends had arranged themselves comfortably. The stocky African-American man nodded to Mary with a smile. Frank Johnson, miss. That was some fancy coffee pouring earlier. Dave Wilson, said the one with glasses, his voice surprisingly soft. Pleased to meet you. The broad-shouldered man's kind eyes crinkled at the corners. They call me Doc, for obvious reasons once upon a time. Mary smiled genuinely for what felt like the first time that night. Mary Carter, and thank you all again. Tom slid into the booth. Sit with us a minute if you can, he invited, gesturing to the empty space beside him. You look like you could use a breather. Mary glanced around the diner. The few remaining customers seemed settled, and Rose would call if she needed help. She sat down gratefully, placing the coffee pot on the table. Those men, Tom said quietly. They have bothered you before. Mary nodded reluctantly. A few times. They never stay long, just come in to cause trouble and leave without paying most of their bill. And no one stops them? Frank asked, his deep voice carrying a hint of controlled anger. Mary shrugged helplessly. Most people around here just want to avoid problems. The town's been struggling since the factory closed. Everyone's just trying to get by. That doesn't make it right. Doc commented, his eyes drifting to her bruised wrist. Mary unconsciously reached for her necklace again, drawing comfort from the familiar shape of the medallion. Tom's eyes followed the movement recognition once more, flickering in their depths. Marine Corps, he said softly. Your father. Mary nodded, surprised. How did you know? The way you hold it, like it's precious, and I noticed the same emblem earlier. He rolled up his sleeve further to reveal his own tattoo completely. Once a Marine, always a Marine. My dad was a Marine. Mary confirmed, a mixture of pride and sadness coloring her words. He died 5 years ago. Tom's expression remained neutral, but his eyes showed understanding. I'm sorry to hear that. What was his name, if you don't mind my asking? James Carter, Jim to his friends. He served in Lebanon and Panama. Tom exchanged glances with Frank, something unspoken passing between them. Good outfit, the Marines, Tom said. They teach you values that stick with you, honor, courage, commitment. Mary felt tears threatening again. That's what Dad always said. He told me that honor isn't just a word, it's how you live your life when no one's looking. She looked down at the table. Sometimes I wonder if anyone believes in those things anymore. Some of us still do, Dave said quietly from across the table. Rose appeared with 4 slices of apple pie and set them down with surprising gentleness. Her earlier suspicion had apparently been replaced with gratitude after Mary had quickly explained what happened while they were in the kitchen. On the house, she told them firmly. Anyone who stands up for my girl deserves free pie at minimum. Tom thanked her with a nod. As Rose returned to the kitchen, he turned his attention back to Mary. That fellow mentioned your father. You knew him. Mary shook her head. Not that I know of. Dad had disagreements with people sometimes. He believed in standing up for what's right even when it was unpopular. She smiled sadly. Mom always said that's what would get him in trouble someday. And it did. What happened? Frank asked gently. Mary hesitated, then decided these men had earned her trust. Bar fight. Someone was harassing a woman. Dad intervened. He won the fight, but took a knife to the ribs. Punctured lung. He died on the way to the hospital. She swallowed hard. The other guy walked away with community service, said it was self-defense, and there weren't many witnesses willing to say otherwise. The 4 men were silent, their faces grave. Tom's hand tightened around his coffee cup. And your mother? Doc asked after a moment. Mary sighed, the weight of her responsibilities settling back onto her shoulders. She had a stroke 2 years ago. The medical bills keep piling up. That's why I'm working here nights after my day job at the pharmacy. No other family to help? Dave inquired. Just us, always has been. Mary straightened her shoulders. We'll manage. Mom's a fighter, and so am I. Tom studied her with newfound respect. I believe that. Mary glanced at the clock and realized she had been sitting with them for nearly 20 minutes. I should get back to work, she said, starting to rise. Before you go, Tom said, reaching into his jacket. He pulled out a business card and handed it to her. It was simple black text on white cardstock, Brotherhood of the Road, with a phone number beneath it. "What is this?" Mary asked, examining the card. "We're not just some random bikers," Tom explained. "We're all veterans. We travel around the country helping where we can. Mostly other vets who've fallen on hard times, but anyone who needs it, really." "Like guardian angels on Harleys," Frank added with a grin. Mary looked at the four men with new understanding. There was indeed something about them that spoke of military service, the way they carried themselves, their situational awareness, the economy of their movements. "If you ever need anything," Tom continued, "you call that number. Someone will answer day or night." Mary pocketed the card, touched by the offer, but certain she would never use it. She had spent her life learning to stand on her own 2 feet. "Thank you, but we'll be okay." Tom nodded, respecting her pride. "Sometimes strength is knowing when to ask for help, Mary. Your father would tell you the same thing." The statement hit home with unexpected force. It was exactly the sort of thing her father would say. Mary blinked rapidly and turned away before they could see her eyes welling up again. For the next hour, as she finished her shift, the four men sat quietly in their booth eating pie and drinking coffee. They kept their conversation low, occasionally glancing toward the door as if expecting Mark and his friends to return. Their presence created an atmosphere of safety that spread throughout the small diner. Old Bill stopped by their table on his way out, leaning in to speak quietly with Tom. Mary couldn't hear what was said, but saw Tom nod solemnly before the two men shook hands with the firm grip of those who had shared similar experiences in different wars. As closing time approached, the bikers paid their bill, leaving a tip that made Mary's eyes widen. Tom waved away her protests. "You earned it, dealing with those idiots earlier." The four men donned their jackets and prepared to leave. Outside, the rain had finally stopped, and the clouds had parted to reveal a sky full of stars. "Where are you headed?" Mary asked as she walked them to the door. "We've got a place to stay about 20 miles from here." Tom answered, "We're meeting some other Brotherhood members tomorrow. Veteran who lost his house in a fire needs help rebuilding." Mary nodded, admiring their mission. "That's really wonderful what you do." Tom shrugged modestly. "Just paying it forward. Someone did the same for me once when I came back from overseas and didn't know how to be a civilian anymore." As they stepped outside, the cool night air was refreshing after hours in the diner. Mary followed them to their motorcycles, impressive Harleys lined up neatly in the parking lot. "Thank you again," she said sincerely. "Most people wouldn't have gotten involved." "We're not most people," Frank responded with a wink. As Tom swung his leg over his bike, he paused, seeming to make a decision. He reached into an inner pocket of his jacket and withdrew an envelope which he extended to Mary. "What's this?" she asked, not taking it. "For you," he said simply. "For the medicine for your mom." Mary stared at the envelope, then shook her head. "I can't accept money from strangers." Tom's scarred face softened into a smile. "We're not strangers anymore, and this isn't charity. It's one Marine's family helping another." When she still hesitated, he added, "Your father would have done the same for any of us. In fact, I'd bet he did similar things in his time." It was true. Her father had often helped others, quietly never mentioning it unless Mary happened to catch him in the act. How many times had he paid for a veteran's meal at a restaurant? How many times had he driven an elderly neighbor to doctor appointments or fixed something in their home? With trembling fingers, Mary accepted the envelope. "I don't know what to say." "You don't need to say anything," Tom assured her. "Just promise you'll call that number if you ever need help again, day or night." Mary nodded, clutching the envelope to her chest. "I promise." Tom started his motorcycle, the powerful engine rumbling to life. The others followed suit, creating a chorus of Harley-Davidson thunder in the quiet night. "Be seeing you, Mary Carter," Tom called over the noise. "Stay strong." With that, the four riders pulled out of the parking lot and onto the main road, their taillights soon disappearing into the darkness like retreating guardian angels. Mary stood for a long moment under the stars, the envelope pressed against her heart. For the first time in years, she felt seen. She felt safe. She felt like maybe the world still had good people left in it after all. When she finally opened the envelope back inside the diner, her hands began to shake. Inside was a note that read, "From the Brotherhood of the Road. You're stronger than you know. Keep fighting." Beneath it lay a stack of $100 bills, more money than she had seen in months. "What's that?" Rose asked, coming up beside her. Mary showed her the note and the money, her voice catching as she explained. Rose's weathered face softened with emotion. "Well, I'll be—" the older woman murmured. "Angels do exist after all. They just wear leather instead of wings." That night, as Mary cleaned the diner for closing, she found herself smiling at her reflection in the freshly wiped windows. The young woman staring back wasn't the same one who had stood there trembling hours ago. She had been reminded of something powerful, that even in a cruel world, kindness can still roar louder than hate. Her father had known this. Now she did too. And somewhere out on the dark highway, 4 guardian angels on motorcycles continued their journey, unaware that they had not only protected a waitress from harassment, but had restored her faith in humanity. Mary touched the Marine Corps medallion around her neck, feeling closer to her father than she had in years. "I'll make you proud, Dad," she whispered to the empty diner. "I promise." The neon sign outside flickered once more before settling into a steady glow, illuminating the rain-washed parking lot where everything had changed with the simple courage of those willing to stand up for what was right. 2 days after the night that changed everything, Mary found herself watching the door of the diner with new awareness. Each time the bell chimed, her eyes would dart to the entrance, half expecting to see Mark and his cronies return to make good on their threats. Or perhaps, though she wouldn't admit it to herself, hoping to see 4 leather-clad guardian angels ride back into her life. Neither had materialized. The envelope of cash from Tom and the Brotherhood of the Road remained hidden in her apartment, tucked between the pages of her father's old Marine Corps manual. She had counted it 3 times in disbelief. $2,000. Enough to cover her mother's medication for several months. Enough to finally fix the ancient water heater that had been providing only lukewarm showers for the past year. Enough to offer a small cushion of security she hadn't experienced since before her father died. Yet Mary couldn't bring herself to spend it. Pride, that stubborn Carter family trait, kept the money hidden away like a secret talisman. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. "Accepting help isn't weakness, but you never take what you haven't earned." Had she earned this kindness from strangers? The question plagued her as she moved through her shift, refilling coffee cups and delivering plates of eggs and bacon to the morning crowd. Rose noticed her distraction. The older woman cornered her in the small break room, arms crossed over her ample chest. "You still worrying about those men coming back, or those bikers?" Mary shook her head, busying herself with straightening her apron. "Just tired, Rose. Mom had a rough night." Rose's eyes softened. Nancy Carter's condition had become a shared concern among the diner's staff and regular customers. "How's she doing with the new medication?" "About the same," Mary sighed. "The doctor says we need to give it time, but every day she seems a little weaker. I'm starting to wonder if they really know what they're doing." "Doctors," Rose scoffed. "Half of them are guessing the other half are covering their behinds." She patted Mary's shoulder awkwardly, a woman unaccustomed to showing physical affection. "Your mother's a fighter just like you, just like your daddy was." The mention of her father brought a lump to Mary's throat. "Thanks, Rose. Now get back out there. Table 6 is getting impatient, and Jerry can't handle the morning rush alone." Mary nodded and pushed through the swinging door back into the diner. The familiar sounds and smells washed over her sizzling bacon coffee, brewing the murmur of conversation and silverware clinking against plates. This had been her world for 4 years now. Sometimes it felt like a prison, other times a sanctuary. The morning passed in its usual rhythm until shortly before noon, when the door chimed and Mary looked up to see Sheriff Dan Holcomb entering. He removed his hat as he approached the counter, revealing thinning brown hair slicked back with too much pomade. At 45, Holcomb had the soft physique of a man whose exercise consisted mainly of walking from his cruiser to the donut shop. "Morning, Mary," he greeted, settling onto his stool at the counter. "Coffee black?" Mary poured his usual cup, keeping her expression neutral. Sheriff Holcomb was not well respected in town, having gained his position through family connections rather than competence. The rumor that he was related to Mark and his friends didn't surprise her in the least. "Heard there was some trouble here night before last," he said casually, stirring a packet of sugar into his coffee despite having asked for it black. Mary tensed. "Nothing serious, Sheriff." "Not what I heard." His pale blue eyes studied her over the rim of his cup. "Heard some out-of-town bikers caused a disturbance. Threatened some local boys." The deliberate mischaracterization made Mary's blood boil, but she kept her voice steady. "That's not what happened. Mark Jennings and his friends were harassing me. The bikers intervened." Holcomb made a non-committal sound. "Mark tells a different story. Says those bikers threatened him without provocation." "Mark is lying." The words came out sharper than she intended. The sheriff's expression hardened. "Watch your tone, young lady. Making accusations against respected members of this community could land you in hot water." Mary almost laughed at the description of Mark as a respected member of anything. "There were witnesses," she pointed out. "Yeah, old Bill Jenkins, who's half-blind, a trucker passing through town, and a woman who was asleep most of the time." Holcomb smiled thinly. "Not exactly reliable. Rose saw what happened. Rose Henderson would back whatever story you tell, and we both know it." He leaned forward. "Listen, Mary, I've known you since you were knee-high. Your daddy and I didn't always see eye to eye, but I respected him. So I'm giving you some friendly advice. Be careful about the company you keep. Those bikers aren't the heroes you think they are." Mary felt her jaw clench. "They helped me when no one else would." Holcomb drained his coffee and stood dropping a few bills on the counter. Just watch yourself. This is a small town. We'd take care of our own problems without outside interference. He settled his hat back on his head. By the way, how's your mother doing? Heard she might be transferred to the county facility if her insurance doesn't come through. The thinly veiled threat wasn't lost on Mary. The county facility was notorious for its poor care and high mortality rates. Her hands trembled slightly as she collected his money. Mom's doing fine, thanks for asking. Good to hear. Holcomb nodded and headed for the door. Give her my regards. After he left, Mary gripped the edge of the counter, breathing deeply to calm herself. The sheriff's visit had been no coincidence. Someone Mark, or perhaps his father, had pulled strings sending a clear message, drop it. Accept the harassment. Know your place. The old Mary might have done just that, swallowing her pride and her fear to protect what little security she had. But something had changed that rainy night. The courage of 4 strangers had awakened something in her that had been dormant since her father's death. A sense that justice mattered, that standing tall in the face of intimidation wasn't just right, it was necessary. She reached for the business card Tom had given her, which she'd kept in her apron pocket. Brotherhood of the Road. It read simply with a phone number beneath. Her finger traced the embossed letters, considering. Everything okay? Rose asked, emerging from the kitchen to find Mary staring at the card. Mary quickly tucked it away. Sheriff Holcomb was just trying to intimidate me. Apparently Mark is telling people the bikers threatened him, not the other way around. Sure, Rose snorted. That boy's been lying since he could talk. Takes after his daddy that way. She lowered her voice. Speaking of which, I heard Carl Blake Sr. is back in town. Mary felt a chill. Carl Blake Sr. was a name spoken with mixed fear and resentment in Eagle Ridge. The wealthy developer had left town years ago after acquiring most of the struggling businesses, only to close them down and leave storefronts empty. His son Carl Jr. was reportedly even worse, a playboy with a mean streak who treated the town like his personal playground when he visited. What's he doing back here? Mary asked. I thought he'd moved on to bigger cities after bleeding this one dry. Rose shrugged. Rumor is he's interested in the old hospital property. Since they built the new medical center on the edge of town, that prime downtown real estate has been sitting empty. The old hospital, just 2 blocks from where her mother now received treatment at the medical center. Mary frowned. What would he want with that casino, maybe shopping center? Who knows? Whatever makes him the most money with the least benefit to folks around here. Rose wiped down the counter with unnecessary vigor. Your daddy butted heads with him back in the day, you know, when Blake tried to buy out the Veterans Hall. Mary hadn't known this. Her father rarely brought his conflicts home, preferring to shield his family from the harsher realities of small-town politics. What happened? Jim organized the other veterans. They refused to sell no matter what Blake offered. Made him look bad in front of his investors. Rose smiled at the memory. Your daddy was something else. Not many people stood up to Carl Blake and won. The pieces began falling into place. Mark's comments about her father. The sheriff's thinly veiled threats. If Blake was back in town with plans for development, anyone associated with past resistance might become a target. The afternoon shift crawled by the diner unusually quiet. Even the regulars seemed subdued, conversations hushed, as if the whole town was holding its breath. By the time Mary hung up her apron at 5 o'clock, her shoulders ached with tension. The walk to Hillside Care Center normally took 15 minutes, a chance for Mary to clear her head between jobs. Today, though, she felt watched with each step. Twice she turned to find no one behind her, but the sensation persisted like a cold finger tracing her spine. Hillside sat on a gentle slope overlooking Eagle Ridge, a modern one-story building that had replaced the century-old hospital downtown. Despite its newness, budget cuts had left it understaffed and under-equipped. Mary pushed through the automatic doors into the antiseptic-scented lobby, nodding to the receptionist as she made her way to room 112. Nancy Carter sat propped up in bed, a book open on her lap, though her eyes were fixed on the window. At 53, illness had aged her prematurely, turning her once honey-blonde hair completely silver and etching deep lines around her eyes and mouth. Yet there remained a quiet dignity in her posture, a spark of the woman who had raised Mary single-handedly after Jim's death. Hey, Mom, Mary said softly, bending to kiss her mother's forehead. Nancy's face brightened. Mary, I was just thinking about you. Good thoughts, I hope. Mary settled into the visitor's chair, noting with concern how the simple act of turning her head seemed to tire her mother. Always. Nancy reached for her daughter's hand. How was work? Same as usual. Mary forced a smile, unwilling to burden her mother with her concerns. Old Bill and Martha came in for breakfast. Martha brought pictures of their new grandbaby. They chatted about town gossip, and the book Nancy was reading a murder mystery that she complained was too predictable until a nurse arrived with medication. Mary watched carefully as her mother swallowed the pills, mentally cataloging them against what had been prescribed. Her job at the pharmacy had made her vigilant about medication errors. Dr. Perkins stopped by this morning, Nancy mentioned after the nurse left. Mary tensed. What did he say, Olid? The usual need more tests, might adjust my medication. Nancy's expression grew troubled. He mentioned something about insurance authorization for continued care. Mary, if the coverage runs out. Don't worry about that, Mary interrupted firmly. I'm handling it. Nancy studied her daughter's face. You're working too hard. I see it in your eyes. I'm fine, Mom. You're not fine. You're 24 years old working 2 jobs with no time for friends or dating or any kind of life. Nancy's eyes filled with tears. This isn't what your father and I wanted for you. Mary swallowed the lump in her throat. What I want is for you to get better. Everything else can wait. Some things can't wait forever, honey. Nancy squeezed her hand weakly. Promise me you won't put your life on hold indefinitely. Jim would hate seeing you sacrifice everything. The mention of her father coming so soon after Rose's revelations broke something in Mary's composure. Did Dad ever tell you about problems with Carl Blake, the developer? Nancy's expression shifted subtly, a guardedness entering her eyes. Why do you ask? Rose mentioned something today, about Dad organizing veterans against Blake buying their hall. Nancy was silent for a long moment. Your father believed in standing up for what was right, especially for those who couldn't stand up for themselves. It made him enemies. Like Blake, among others. Nancy sighed. Jim tried to keep that part of his life separate from us. He didn't want us worried. Was there more to it than the Veterans Hall? Mary pressed. Nancy's gaze drifted to the window again. There were rumors about Blake's business practices. Cutting corners on construction, bribing officials for permits, pressuring people to sell when they didn't want to. Your father started asking questions, especially after a roof collapsed at one of Blake's developments. A veteran family's home. The child was injured. Mary felt a chill. And nothing came of it. Blake had too many connections. The official report blamed faulty materials from a supplier. Nancy looked back at her daughter. Why are you asking about this now? Mary hesitated, torn between honesty and protection. Blake is back in town, supposedly interested in the old hospital property. Nancy's face paled slightly. Mary, listen to me. Stay away from anything to do with Carl Blake. He's dangerous in ways that aren't always obvious. Mom, promise me. Nancy's voice strengthened with maternal authority. Your father would say the same thing. There are battles worth fighting, and then there are suicide missions. Know the difference? Mary nodded reluctantly, but her mind was already racing. If Blake had been an enemy of her father's, could there be a connection to Jim's death? To her mother's mysterious stroke that doctors still couldn't fully explain, the coincidence seemed too great. Their visit was cut short when Nancy began showing signs of fatigue. Mary helped her get comfortable, promised to bring her favorite peppermint tea tomorrow, and left with a heavy heart. Outside the sun was setting, painting Eagle Ridge in deceptively warm golden hues. Instead of heading directly home, Mary found herself walking toward downtown, drawn to the old hospital building that had suddenly become the center of new questions. The 3-story brick structure had stood empty for 2 years, windows boarded up a chain-link fence surrounding the property. A faded sign announced future development coming soon, without specifics. As she stood across the street studying the building, a sleek black Cadillac pulled up to the fence. 2 men emerged, one in an expensive suit that screamed money and power, the other in security attire. Even at a distance, Mary recognized Carl Blake Sr. from newspaper photos. Tall and distinguished-looking, with silver hair and the confident bearing of someone accustomed to getting his way, he surveyed the property like a king assessing a new territory. Mary ducked into a nearby doorway, instinctively avoiding being seen. Blake and the security man unlocked the fence gate and disappeared inside the building. Curiosity overcame caution. Mary crossed the street and approached the fence, staying in the lengthening shadows. From this vantage point, she could see through a ground-floor window where boards had come loose. Blake and his companion were examining what had once been the hospital lobby, gesturing at walls and ceilings. They appeared to be discussing renovations, though she couldn't hear their words. The security man suddenly turned, looking directly toward where Mary stood. She froze, heart-pounding, but the gathering darkness must have concealed her. After a moment, both men moved deeper into the building, out of her sight. Mary backed away from the fence, intending to leave before they returned, when her foot struck something metal. Looking down, she saw a small digital recorder, the kind journalists use for interviews. It must have fallen from someone's pocket recently. She picked it up, glancing around to see if anyone was nearby looking for it, but the street remained empty. Pocketing the device, Mary hurried away from the old hospital, her mind churning with questions and suspicions. She had nearly reached her apartment building when the sensation of being watched returned stronger than before. This time, when she turned, she caught a glimpse of movement in the shadows across the street, a figure quickly ducking behind a parked car. Mary quickened her pace, fumbling for her keys as she approached the building's entrance. Just as she reached the door, a hand gripped her arm. She whirled prepared to fight, only to find herself face to face with a familiar figure. "Dave!" she gasped. Dave Wilson, the biker with glasses from Tom's group, raised a finger to his lips, signaling for quiet. "Inside," he murmured. "Quickly." Once in her small apartment, Mary turned to Dave with a mixture of relief and confusion. "What are you doing here? How did you find me?" Dave removed his glasses, polishing them on his shirt, a gesture that seemed incongruously gentle for his rough appearance. "Small town's easy to find people. As for why," his eyes met hers. "Tom sent me to check on you. Good thing he did." "What do you mean?" "You've been followed since you left the hospital." "Not by me," he clarified. "Two men in a black SUV. They waited outside while you visited your mother, then followed you downtown. When you approached the old hospital, one of them made a call." Mary sank onto her worn sofa, the reality of the situation hitting her. "Did they see you?" Dave shook his head. "I know how to stay invisible when I need to." He looked around the small apartment, taking in the modest furnishings and the family photos on the walls. "You live here alone?" Mary nodded. "Since Mom went into care. It's all I can afford, but it's home." She hesitated, then asked, "Why would Tom send you to check on me?" Dave settled into the chair across from her, his large frame making the furniture seem smaller. "Tom has a sixth sense about trouble. After we left town, he couldn't shake the feeling that there was more going on than just some local thugs harassing a waitress." He studied her face. It seems he was right. "Tim." Mary told him about Sheriff Holcomb's visit, Rose's information about Blake, and what she'd learned from her mother. She also showed him the digital recorder she'd found. Dave examined the device carefully. "Mind if I listen?" Mary gestured for him to go ahead. Dave pressed play, and a male voice filled the small living room. "Testing, testing. Richard's here. September 17th meeting with Source about Blake Development Holdings." There was a pause, background noise then. "According to documents provided by the Source, Blake has been systematically acquiring properties in Eagle Ridge through shell companies, hiding the extent of his ownership from town officials. The old hospital acquisition would give him controlling interest in the downtown area." Another pause. "Source claims Blake intends to rezone the entire district for commercial use, effectively forcing out remaining residential properties. Small businesses would face massive rent increases." The recording continued, detailing allegations of bribery, falsified environmental reports, and pressure tactics against holdout property owners. Mary and Dave listened in growing dismay as the unknown journalist laid out a comprehensive picture of corruption and manipulation. The final segment of the recording was most disturbing. Source mentioned possible connection between Blake Development and several unexplained accidents involving project opponents. Claims to have documentation linking Blake's security firm to at least 3 incidents, including the death of former Marine James Carter in 2010. Will attempt to obtain evidence at next meeting. The recording ended abruptly. Mary sat frozen, the mention of her father's name sending shockwaves through her system. Dave's expression had grown increasingly grim. "James Carter," he said quietly. "Your father." Mary nodded, unable to speak. "The bar fight wasn't random," Dave concluded, putting the pieces together. "If this journalist's source is reliable, your father was targeted." "But why?" Mary's voice broke. "Dad was just a regular guy, a former Marine who worked construction. What threat could he possibly pose to someone like Blake?" Dave leaned forward. "You said your father organized veterans against selling their haul. What if he discovered something in the process? Something Blake couldn't afford to have exposed?" Mary's mind raced, memories resurfacing. Her father, coming home late, having hushed conversations on the phone, the worried looks her mother would give him. The strange car that would sometimes be parked down the street. At the time, she'd thought nothing of these things, too wrapped up in her own teenage world. "And now Blake's back," she whispered, "going after the hospital property." "With you and your mother still in town," Dave added grimly. "Potential loose ends." Mary's blood ran cold. "My mother's stroke. It happened so suddenly. The doctors were puzzled by some of the symptoms." She looked up at Dave, horror dawning. "Could they have—" Dave didn't answer directly. "Where's your mother's medical file, recent test results, medication list?" "I have copies here. I keep track of everything." Mary retrieved a folder from her desk, handing it to Dave. He reviewed the documents carefully. "I'm not a medical doctor, but Doc is. He was a combat medic, then worked in VA hospitals for years before retiring." He took out his phone. "I need to send him these results if that's okay. He might see something the local doctors missed." Mary nodded, her permission watching as Dave photographed the medical records and texted them to his friend. While they waited for a response, she made coffee. her hands shaking slightly as the implications of the recording sank in. Why would a journalist leave his recorder at the scene? She wondered aloud, setting mugs on the small kitchen table. Might not have been intentional, Dave replied, accepting the coffee gratefully. More likely he was interrupted or scared off. Question is, who was his source? Mary's phone rang, startling them both. The caller ID showed Hillside Care Center. Mary Carter speaking, she answered, trying to keep her voice steady. Miss Carter, this is Nurse Jenkins from Hillside. I'm calling about your mother. Mary's grip tightened on the phone. What's happened? She's experienced some concerning symptoms a short time ago. Dr. Perkins has ordered additional tests and changed her medication. I wanted to let you know. What kind of symptoms? Mary demanded. Elevated heart rate, confusion, weakness on her left side. Similar to her initial stroke presentation, but milder. Dr. Perkins believes it may be a TIA, a mini-stroke. I'll be right there. That's not necessary tonight, Ms. Carter. Your mother is resting comfortably now, and visits after 8 p.m. are restricted except for emergencies. Mary glanced at the clock, 7:45 p.m. This is an emergency. Dr. Perkins specifically said not to disturb her rest. He left instructions that she's to have no visitors until tomorrow morning. The nurse's voice softened slightly. I promise we're monitoring her closely. The best thing you can do is let her sleep and come first thing tomorrow. After extracting a promise that the nurse would call immediately if anything changed, Mary hung up, her face pale. My mother, she told Dave. They're saying she may have had another mini-stroke. Dave's phone buzzed with a text. He read it quickly, his expression darkening. Doc wants to know if your mother takes warfarin or any blood thinners. Mary checked the medication list. No, her medication is primarily for hypertension and cholesterol. Dave typed this response, then waited. Another text came through. Doc says some of her symptoms are consistent with warfarin overdose, not necessarily a stroke, especially the pattern of bruising noted in her file. Warfarin? Mary frowned. That's a blood thinner, right? But she's not prescribed that. Dave's eyes met hers. Exactly. If someone wanted to make a stroke look more likely or trigger another one... The implication hung in the air between them. Mary felt sick. We need to get her out of there. Now. Wait. Dave held up a hand. If we're right about this, rushing in could make things worse. We need a plan. He texted rapidly, then looked up at Mary. Tom and the others are 3 hours away, but they're heading back now. In the meantime, I think we should take this recorder to someone who can authenticate it. And you need to get somewhere safe for the night. I'm not hiding while my mother's in danger, Mary protested. You can't help her if you're hurt or worse, Dave countered. Think, if Blake discovers you have this recording or suspects you know something about your father's death being more than an accident... Damn it, Mary wanted to argue, but the logic was undeniable. Where can we go if the sheriff is in Blake's pocket? The police aren't an option. Dave considered for a moment. Is there anyone in town you trust completely, someone Blake wouldn't immediately connect to you? Mary thought of Rose, but dismissed the idea quickly. The diner owner was too obvious a connection. Then an idea struck her. Mrs. Watkins. She was my high school librarian. She and Mom were friends before Mom got sick. She lives outside town on a small farm. Can you call her without mentioning specifics? Mary nodded and made the call. Mrs. Watkins answered on the third ring, her voice warm with surprise at hearing from her former student. Mary fabricated a story about a plumbing emergency in her apartment building, asking if she could stay the night. The older woman agreed without hesitation, giving Mary directions to remind her of the route. Pack a bag, Dave instructed after she hung up. Essentials only. And bring your mother's complete medical file. While Mary gathered her things, Dave made another call, speaking in low tones. She caught fragments. Possible poisoning, need extraction, decompromised facility. The military precision of his language reminded her that these men were veterans trained for emergency situations. 20 minutes later, they slipped out the back exit of Mary's apartment building. Dave led her to a nondescript sedan parked 2 blocks away, not the motorcycle she'd expected. Borrowed from a friend, he explained, holding the door for her. Less conspicuous than a Harley right now. As they drove through town, Mary kept scanning for signs of the black SUV Dave had mentioned, but the streets were quiet. Once they reached the outskirts, Dave visibly relaxed, though his eyes continued checking the rearview mirror regularly. Tell me about your father, he said, breaking the silence. Tom seemed to recognize the name, but wouldn't say why. Mary fingered her father's medallion, a habit, when she was anxious. Dad was in the Marines for 20 years, Force Recon. He didn't talk much about his service, but I know he served in Beirut and Panama. After he got out, he worked construction, then started his own small contracting business. Good man. The best, Mary said without hesitation. Tough but fair. He coached Little League even though I was the only girl on the team. Taught me to change a tire and throw a punch. She smiled at the memories. He had this saying, there are 3 things a person needs in life, someone to love, something to do, and something to hope for. He made sure I had all 3. Dave nodded appreciatively. Sounds like he lived by the core values, honor, courage, commitment. He did, Mary confirmed, which makes this recording even more confusing. Dad wasn't involved in anything shady. He wouldn't be. Sometimes, Dave said carefully, good men discover bad things. And doing the right thing puts them in danger. They traveled in silence for several miles, the headlights illuminating the empty country road ahead. Finally, Dave pulled onto a gravel driveway marked by a rustic mailbox, Watkins Farm. Mrs. Watkins was waiting on the porch of her farmhouse, a spry woman in her 70s with silver hair and keen eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. She welcomed Mary with a warm hug, then regarded Dave with curious but not unfriendly assessment. This is Dave, Mary introduced. He's a friend who's helping me with some transportation issues. Any friend of Mary's is welcome here, Mrs. Watkins declared, ushering them inside. The farmhouse was cozy and smelled of cinnamon and apples. I've made up the guest room for you, dear, and your friend can take the sofa if needed. Just dropping Mary off, ma'am, Dave replied politely, but I appreciate the offer. Mrs. Watkins insisted on feeding them anyway, serving homemade apple cobbler and coffee at her kitchen table. The normalcy of it provided a strange counterpoint to the tension of the evening. Mary found herself relaxing slightly for the first time in hours. After they ate, Dave asked to speak with Mary privately. Mrs. Watkins discreetly retreated to her sewing room, leaving them alone in the kitchen. Tom and the others will be here by morning, Dave informed her. Doc is contacting a colleague at the State Medical Licensing Board, a fellow veteran. We're going to move your mother to a different facility tomorrow. Mary felt tears of relief and gratitude threatening. I don't know how to thank you all. No thanks needed. Dave handed her a prepaid cell phone. Use this to contact us. Keep your regular phone off if you need to preserve the battery, but keep it with you in case someone tries to reach you about your mother. He stood to leave, but Mary caught his arm. Why are you doing all this? You barely know me. Dave studied her for a moment, his expression softening. When I came home from Iraq, I was lost. Nightmares couldn't hold a job, pushed away everyone who cared. One night in a bar, I got into it with some guys who wouldn't stop harassing the bartender. I was outnumbered, drunk, and about to get my head caved in when Tom and Frank walked in. He smiled at the memory. They didn't know me. Had no reason to help, but they did. Saved more than just my hide that night, they saved my life in all the ways that matter. He adjusted his glasses, a gesture that seemed to ground him. The brotherhood gave me purpose again, helping others, standing up for what's right. Your father understood that kind of code. So do you, I think. Mary nodded, touched by his openness. Get some rest, Dave advised. Tomorrow's going to be challenging. After he left, Mary accepted Mrs. Watkins' offer of a hot bath and clean towels. The older woman didn't pry, though her perceptive eyes suggested she knew something more serious than a plumbing problem was at stake. As a librarian, she'd always respected people's privacy, while making it clear she was available to help. In the guest room, Mary finally examined the contents of the envelope Tom had given her. Beyond the cash, she found a handwritten note with a name and address in the next county, along with the words, "If trouble comes, she'll help. Tell her Scarface sent you." The nickname brought an unexpected smile to Mary's lips, imagining the dignified Tom responding to such a moniker. Sleep came fitfully, her dreams filled with images of her father, her ailing mother, and shadowy figures watching from darkened windows. She woke shortly after dawn to the sound of motorcycle engines, a sound that now represented safety rather than threat. Looking out the guest room window, she saw 4 familiar bikes pulling up the gravel drive. Tom dismounted first, his tall figure unmistakable even from a distance. Frank, Doc, and another man she didn't recognize followed. Mrs. Watkins was already in the kitchen, calmly preparing enough breakfast for an army. Your friends are here, she informed Mary with a knowing smile. Good men, I'd say, from the look of them. The best, Mary agreed, realizing she believed it with absolute certainty. As she opened the front door to greet her unexpected guardians, Mary touched her father's medallion once more. For the first time since his death, she felt his presence strongly, a sense that somehow across the divide of years and loss, he had sent these men to continue what he could not, standing up against injustice, protecting the vulnerable, and living by the code that had defined his life. Honor, courage, commitment. The Brotherhood of the Road embodied these values not as abstract concepts, but as a way of life. And in their company, Mary felt ready to face whatever dangers lay ahead in the fight for truth about her father's death and justice for her mother's suffering. Tom approached the porch, his scarred face solemn, but his eyes warm as they met hers. Morning, Mary. Hope you slept well. Better knowing you were coming, she replied honestly. He nodded, understanding the weight behind her words. We've got work to do. Yes, Mary agreed, straightening her shoulders. We certainly do. The morning sunlight streamed through Mrs. Watkins' kitchen windows, illuminating 5 weathered faces gathered around the oak table. Mary watched as Tom spread out a hand-drawn map of Eagle Ridge, his fingers tracing the main routes through town with the precision of a military strategist. The smell of coffee and bacon lingered in the air, courtesy of their hostess, who had fed them all before discreetly retreating to her garden, respecting their need for privacy. Hillside Care Center has 2 main entrances, Tom explained, marking the points with a pencil. Front is always monitored, but the service entrance around back has minimal security. Doc will go in through the front using his medical credentials to gain access. Frank and I will come in through the back. Doc nodded, his broad features set with determination. I've spoken with my contact at the state medical board. He's faxed emergency transfer orders to Mrs. Watkins' home office. They'll be expecting a specialist consultation, followed by potential transfer. Mary leaned forward, anxiety knotting her stomach. What if they resist if Blake has influence there? That's why we're not giving them a choice, Tom replied, his voice calm but resolute. The transfer orders are legitimate, signed by the state health commissioner. Even if they wanted to object, they'd be risking their licenses. The 4th biker, introduced as Max, spoke up. I'll be in the ambulance. Former paramedics still have my certifications. We've got a private medical transport unit meeting us just across the county line. Where will you take her? Mary asked. Veterans Memorial Hospital in Carlson County, Tom answered. The chief of medicine there is a former Navy doctor. He served with me in Desert Storm. Your mother will receive the best care possible, and more importantly, she'll be safe. Mary felt tears threatening and blinked them away. These men had orchestrated an entire medical evacuation plan overnight, calling in favors and risking their own safety for a woman they'd never met, the widow of a fellow Marine they'd never known. Dave, who had returned at dawn, placed the digital recorder on the table. We need to talk about this, too. The group listened to the recording again, their expressions growing grimmer with each revelation. When it finished, silence filled the kitchen. Richards, Tom finally said. The journalist. Anyone recognize the name? Frank nodded. Michael Richards, writes for the State Tribune, known for investigative pieces on corporate corruption. Is he still in town? Mary asked. Dave shook his head. I made some calls this morning. No one's seen him in 2 days. His editor reported him missing yesterday when he missed a deadline. Police report was filed, but Sheriff Holcomb is unlikely to make it a priority. Mary finished. The source is the key, Doc observed. Whoever provided Richards with this information knows enough to connect Blake to your father's death, and possibly your mother's condition. Mary's hand unconsciously moved to her father's medallion. Mom might know who it is. Dad must have confided in someone. Tom checked his watch. It's time. Dave, you and Mary head to the diner as planned. Act normal. Be seen. Give us the window we need at Hillside. Mary had argued against this part of the plan, wanting to be present for her mother's transfer. Tom had been adamant her sudden appearance at a Hillside would raise alarms, especially after the nurse's warning the previous night. Better for Mary to maintain her routine, providing a distraction, while the Brotherhood moved Nancy to safety. What about the recorder? Mary asked. Mac will take it with him once your mother is secure, Tom explained. He has contacts at the state police who aren't connected to Eagle Ridge or Blake. This needs to go beyond local authorities. The gravity of what they were undertaking settled over the room. This wasn't just about protecting one family anymore. They were challenging a powerful man with deep connections and a willingness to eliminate obstacles. Tom seemed to read her thoughts. Your father stood up when it would have been easier to look away. That kind of courage deserves honor. What Blake and his people have done deserves justice. His scarred face hardened. We're going to make sure both happen. The group dispersed with military efficiency. Mary hugged Mrs. Watkins goodbye, thanking her for the hospitality without explaining the full scope of what was happening. The older woman simply squeezed her hands and said, Your mother was always kind to me when others weren't. I'm glad she has friends looking out for her. Dave drove Mary back toward town in the borrowed sedan, taking a circuitous route to avoid main roads. They rode in silence for several miles, each lost in thought. Are you scared? Dave finally asked. Mary considered the question seriously. Yes, but not for myself. She looked out the window at the passing landscape. When Dad died, I promised myself I'd always take care of Mom, that I'd never let anything hurt her again. Now I find out that not only did I fail to protect her, but I never even knew what I was protecting her from. You couldn't have known. Maybe I should have. Mary turned to face him. Dad was investigating Blake. Mom got sick after asking questions about Dad's death. The pattern was there, but I was too focused on just getting through each day to see it. Dave adjusted his glasses, a gesture Mary now recognized as his way of organizing thoughts. Survival isn't failure, Mary. You did what you had to do with the information you had. He paused. Your father would be proud of you, not just for enduring, but for being willing to fight now that you know the truth. His words eased something in her chest. They approached the outskirts of Eagle Ridge, the small town looking deceptively peaceful in the morning light. Drop me 2 blocks from the diner, Mary instructed. Better if we're not seen together. Dave pulled over as requested. I'll be watching from across the street. If anything seems wrong, I'll be there. Tom and the others should have your mother moved within 2 hours. After your shift, meet me behind the pharmacy. Mary nodded and stepped out of the car. As she walked the familiar route to Rosie's diner, she forced herself to adopt the posture and pace of an ordinary day. Just another morning, another shift, another step in the monotonous dance of survival that had been her life for so long. Only this time everything had changed. Rose looked up in surprise when Mary pushed through the diner's door exactly on time. Didn't expect to see you today, she admitted, after what the sheriff said yesterday. Mary hung up her jacket and tied her apron with practiced movements. Why wouldn't I come to work? Thought she might be at the hospital. Word is your mother had another episode last night. News traveled fast in small towns. Mary feigned the right amount of concern without showing panic. The nurse called me, said Mom was stable and to come during regular visiting hours today. Rose studied her with narrowed eyes, not entirely convinced by Mary's casual attitude. You seemed different this morning. Just tired. Mary deflected, grabbing a coffee pot. Table 3 needs refills. The morning progressed with agonizing slowness. Mary moved through her duties mechanically, her mind constantly calculating time. Had they reached Hillside yet? Was her mother safely away from whatever threat lurked in the medications and treatments being administered there? Every time the door chimed, she looked up, half expecting to see Sheriff Holcomb, or worse, Mark and his cronies. Instead, just after 10, the door opened to reveal Carl Blake Jr. The sight of him froze Mary mid-stride. Unlike Mark's crude aggression, Blake Jr. exuded a more refined menace. Expensively dressed in a tailored suit despite the early hour, his handsome features arranged in a practiced smile that never reached his cold eyes. At 35, he carried himself with the entitled confidence of someone who had never heard the word no. He slid into a booth near the window and picked up a menu, though his eyes tracked Mary's movements across the diner. When she approached to take his order, his smile widened. Mary Carter! He said her name in his mouth, sounding like an appraisal. I don't believe we formally met, though. I understand you've had some interaction with my associates recently. What can I get you, what? Mary asked, neutrally, pen poised over her order pad. Coffee black, and perhaps a few minutes of your time. He gestured to the empty seat across from him. Please join me. I have a proposition that might interest you. Every instinct screamed at Mary to refuse, but causing a scene would draw attention she couldn't afford right now. With Doc and the others at Hillside, she needed to maintain normalcy. Reluctantly, she slid into the booth, keeping her posture rigid and her expression blank. I'm working, Mr. Blake. I don't have long. Of course. He stirred his coffee, though he'd added nothing to it. I'll be direct. My father and I are developing several properties in Eagle Ridge, including the old hospital site. We're creating jobs, revitalizing the economy. Progress, you might say. Mary said nothing, waiting. It's come to my attention that your mother is receiving care at Hillside. Expensive care, I imagine, for someone working 2 jobs to make ends meet. His smile turned sympathetic, though his eyes remained calculating. I'd like to help. Why would you do that? Community goodwill. The Blake family believes in giving back. He leaned forward slightly. We could arrange for your mother's medical expenses to be covered, completely. A special fund for families in need. In exchange for what? Mary kept her voice steady, though her heart raced. Blake Jr. shrugged elegantly. Nothing onerous. Perhaps your support at the next town council meeting when our rezoning proposal is presented. Your family has a certain reputation in Eagle Ridge. The daughter of Jim Carter speaking in favor of our development would carry weight. The mention of her father sent a chill through Mary. My father opposed your family's developments. He had reasons. Something flickered across Blake's face, briefly displeasure, quickly masked. Your father misunderstood our vision for Eagle Ridge. Unfortunately, he listened to some rather unsavory elements spreading misinformation. He sipped his coffee. But that's water under the bridge. This is about your mother's future. And yours. My mother's future is not for sale, Mr. Blake. Everything has a price, Mary. His tone hardened slightly. Medical care especially. I understand Hillside may be reevaluating your mother's coverage. Unfortunate timing. The threat was thinly veiled, but before Mary could respond, the diner door opened again. Sheriff Holcomb entered, his gaze immediately finding Blake. He approached their booth, nodding respectfully to the developer's son. Mr. Blake, Miss Carter. The sheriff's tone shifted noticeably between the two names. Everything all right here? Perfectly pleasant conversation, Sheriff, Blake replied smoothly. Mary and I were discussing community matters. Holcomb's eyes narrowed at Mary. I stopped by Hillside this morning. Heard your mother was having complications. Mary's blood ran cold, but years of hiding her feelings from difficult customers served her well. The nurse said she was stable. Interesting, Holcomb mused, because when I arrived there seemed to be quite a commotion. Something about transfer papers and specialists from out of county. Blake's attention sharpened. Transfer to where? Mary maintained her composure through sheer willpower. This is the first I'm hearing of it. Perhaps Dr. Perkins ordered additional tests. Holcomb studied her skepticism evident. Strange they wouldn't notify next of kin. Perhaps they tried, Mary suggested, standing. I should call them. Excuse me, gentlemen. Blake caught her wrist, his grip surprisingly strong. We haven't finished our discussion. Mary looked pointedly at his hand until he released her. I believe we have, Mr. Blake. My mother's health takes priority over community matters. She walked away, feeling their eyes boring into her back. At the counter, she pretended to make a call while watching their reflection in the metallic coffee machine. Blake and Holcomb were having an intense whispered conversation. Rose appeared beside her. What was that about? Nothing good, Mary murmured. Rose, I may need to leave early today. The older woman nodded without question. Jerry can cover. You do what you need to for your mama. Mary squeezed her hand gratefully, then returned to her duties, hyper-aware of Blake and Holcomb watching her every move. The minutes crawled by. She needed to warn Tom and the others, but couldn't risk making an actual call with Blake and the sheriff present. When Blake finally stood to leave, he approached the counter where Mary was refilling salt shakers, his voice low enough that only she could hear. Consider my offer carefully, Mary. I can be a valuable friend, or a dangerous enemy. Ask your mother which she'd prefer. He placed a business card on the counter. Call me when you're ready to be reasonable. After he departed, Holcomb lingered nursing a coffee, and watching Mary with undisguised suspicion. She continued working her mind, racing through possibilities. The sheriff's presence at Hillside that morning couldn't be coincidence. Had the transfer been completed successfully, was her mother safe? Just after 11, the diner phone rang. Rose answered, then called Mary over. For you, says it's urgent. Mary took the receiver, turning away from Holcomb's watchful gaze. This is Mary. Package secured. Dave's voice came through clearly. Rendezvous changed. Blue Water Tower after your shift. Come alone. Thank you for letting me know, Mary replied formally, conscious of being overheard. I'll be there this afternoon. She hung up and returned to work, relief washing through her. They had succeeded in moving her mother. Now she just needed to get through her shift without arousing further suspicion. Holcomb finally left around noon after making a show of checking his watch and mentioning he needed to follow up on some loose ends at Hillside. The implied threat wasn't lost on Mary, but she knew her mother was beyond his reach now. The rest of her shift passed in a blur of coffee refills and lunch orders. Despite Blake's ominous warning and Holcomb's surveillance, Mary felt a growing sense of determination. For years she had been merely surviving, keeping her head down, accepting injustice because fighting seemed impossible. The Brotherhood had shown her another way, one her father would have approved of. At 2 o'clock, Mary hung up her apron, thanked Rose for understanding, and left the diner by the back door. Instead of heading toward the pharmacy, as she'd originally planned to meet Dave, she made her way toward the old water tower on the edge of town. The change in rendezvous location suggested they were being extra cautious. The water tower stood sentinel over Eagle Ridge, its faded blue paint peeling to reveal rust beneath, much like the town itself showing signs of decay beneath its wholesome facade. Mary climbed the small hill leading to it, constantly checking to ensure she wasn't followed. Dave was waiting in the shade of the tower's massive supports, the borrowed sedan parked discreetly behind a maintenance shed. His expression was grim as she approached. Problems? Mary asked immediately. We got your mother out, but not without complications, Dave explained, leading her to the car. Holcomb showed up during the transfer. Doc managed to keep him occupied with medical jargon while Frank and Tom completed the move, but it was close. Is Mom okay? Stable. Doc's preliminary assessment confirms our suspicions her medication was being tampered with. Low doses of warfarin, not enough to be immediately fatal, but sufficient to cause stroke-like symptoms over time. Dave's hands tightened on the steering wheel as he drove. Someone was slowly killing her, Mary. The confirmation of what they had suspected hit Mary like a physical blow. Where is she now? Safe. We're meeting the others at a temporary location before proceeding to the Veterans Hospital. Dave navigated out of town via back roads, constantly checking the rearview mirror. Tom wanted to make sure we weren't tracked from Hillside. Blake and Holcomb know something's happening, Mary told him, recounting the conversation at the diner. Blake offered to pay Mom's medical expenses in exchange for my support at the town council meeting. Dave snorted. Buying votes while trying to murder your mother. The man has range. They drove for nearly an hour, eventually turning onto a narrow dirt road that led to a hunting cabin nestled among pine trees. 2 motorcycles and an ambulance were parked behind the structure concealed from the main road. Inside, Mary found Tom and Frank standing guard while Doc tended to her mother, who lay on a narrow bed. Nancy Carter looked pale but peaceful, an IV drip connected to her arm, and a portable heart monitor beeping steadily beside her. "Mom?" Mary whispered, rushing to her side. Nancy's eyes fluttered open, recognition and relief flooding her features. "Mary, you're safe." "I'm fine. How are you feeling?" "Better, strangely enough." Nancy's gaze drifted to Doc, who was adjusting her IV. "This gentleman says I've been receiving the wrong medication, that it was making me worse, not better." Doc nodded solemnly. "We've flushed the warfarin from your system and started counteracting its effects. You should notice improvement within days, Mrs. Carter." Mary clasped her mother's hand, noticing it felt warmer, stronger than it had in months. "Mom, these men are helping us. They're part of a veterans group called the Brotherhood of the Road." Nancy studied the men gathered in the small cabin, her eyes lingering on Tom. "You knew Jim, didn't you?" Tom stepped forward, his scarred face solemn. "Not directly, ma'am, but we shared the same values, the same code. Marines take care of their own and their families." Nancy's eyes filled with tears. "Jim always said that, even after he left the Corps." "Mom," Mary said gently, "we found evidence that Dad's death wasn't an accident, and that what happened to you wasn't natural either." Nancy closed her eyes briefly, pain crossing her features that had nothing to do with physical ailments. "I was afraid of that. Jim was getting too close to the truth about Blake's operations. He found documents of financial records, proof of bribes to town officials, falsified safety reports." "What happened to those documents?" Tom asked. "Jim hid them, said the fewer people who knew the safer we'd be." Nancy's voice grew stronger as she spoke, as though unburdening herself of long-held secrets was restorative. "After he died, I tried to find them. I knew they were somewhere in our house, but before I could locate them, I had the stroke, or what I thought was a stroke." "Blake's people got to you," Frank concluded grimly. Nancy nodded. "I think it was my new doctor. Dr. Perkins appeared right after Jim's funeral, claiming my regular physician had referred me. He was so concerned about my blood pressure, insisted on a special medication regimen." Her hand tightened around Mary's. "I was a nurse. I should have questioned it more. But grief makes you vulnerable." "It wasn't your fault, Mom," Mary assured her. "None of this was." "The documents," Tom prompted gently. "Any idea where Jim might have hidden them?" Nancy frowned in concentration. "He mentioned something about keeping the truth under Old Glory. At the time I thought he was speaking metaphorically about justice under the American flag." Mary straightened suddenly. "The flag case. Dad's burial flag from the funeral. It's displayed in our living room." "With his medals," Nancy confirmed, understanding dawning. "The case has a false bottom. Jim designed it himself." Tom and Frank exchanged significant looks. "Those documents could provide the evidence needed to connect Blake to Jim's death and Nancy's poisoning," Tom said. "Combined with the journalist's recording, we need to retrieve them," Dave concluded, "before Blake realizes their importance." "Blake Jr. and Holcomb were at the diner this morning," Mary reminded them. "They know something's happening. They might already be watching our apartment." Tom considered this his tactical mind working through scenarios. "We'll need a distraction. Something to draw attention away from your apartment while a team retrieves the documents." "I can be the distraction," Mary volunteered. "Let Blake see me at Hillside demanding answers about my mother's transfer. It would be the natural reaction." "Too dangerous," Tom objected. "Blake already threatened you." "That's exactly why it would work," Mary countered. "He expects me to be scared confused, not part of an organized response." From her bed, Nancy reached for Mary's hand. "Your father would say it's too risky." "Dad would do it himself," Mary replied softly. "He'd stand up no matter the risk." A look passed between mother and daughter, understanding fear and pride mingled together. Nancy nodded reluctantly. "You are your father's daughter." Tom recognized the resolve in Mary's eyes, the same determination he'd seen in countless Marines facing impossible odds. We'll need a solid plan, no improvising. For the next hour, they mapped out their strategy. Mary would return to Hillside with Dave creating a commotion about her mother's disappearance. Meanwhile, Frank and Mac would retrieve the documents from Mary's apartment. Doc would remain with Nancy, continuing her treatment and preparing for transport to the Veterans Hospital. Tom would coordinate both teams, ready to provide backup where needed. As dusk approached, final preparations were made. Nancy had been moved to the ambulance, more comfortable there with the medical equipment Doc needed to monitor her condition. Mary sat with her mother for a few quiet moments before departure. "I'm scared for you," Nancy admitted, stroking her daughter's cheek. "These men seem trustworthy, but we're challenging, powerful people." "I know," Mary acknowledged, "but I'm tired of being afraid, Mom. Tired of just surviving while people like Blake hurt others without consequences." She fingered her father's medallion. "Dad taught me that courage isn't about being fearless. It's about doing what's right, even when you're terrified." Nancy smiled sadly. "He would be so proud of the woman you've become. I just wish—" Her voice trailed off. "What? I wish you didn't have to be so strong so young. You deserved a normal life, college friends, falling in love. All the things you've put on hold to take care of me." Mary shook her head. "I've never regretted it. Not for a moment." The tender moment was interrupted when Tom appeared at the ambulance door. "It's time. Doc says Mrs. Carter is stable for transport. Mac will drive her to the Veterans Hospital while the rest of us execute the plan." Mary hugged her mother tightly. "I'll see you soon, with Dad's evidence." "Be careful," Nancy whispered. "Remember what your father always said about picking battles." "Know the difference between bravery and foolishness," Mary recited. "I remember." Outside the cabin, the team made final preparations. Frank and Dave checked their phones while Tom reviewed the timing once more. Mary and Dave create the distraction at Hillside at 1900 hours. Frank and I enter the apartment at 1915, extraction by 1930, rendezvous at the county line by 2000. Tom looked at each person, his expression grave. "If anything goes wrong, abort and head directly to the Veterans Hospital. No heroics." Mary nodded, understanding the military precision required for the operation to succeed. Dave handed her a small object, a panic button disguised as a keychain. "Press this if you're in immediate danger," he instructed. "It will alert all of us." As the group prepared to split up, Tom pulled Mary aside. "Your father followed his conscience no matter the cost. It's a rare quality." His scarred face softened slightly. "But remember, living to fight another day isn't cowardice. It's strategy." Mary appreciated his concern. "I'll be careful, but those documents are our best chance at justice for Dad and protection for Mom." Tom nodded, recognizing in her the same determination that had likely led her father to stand against Blake years ago. Honor isn't just about dying for what you believe in. Sometimes it's about living for it, day after difficult day. Remember that. With these parting words, the team dispersed to their assigned tasks. Mary and Dave headed toward Hillside in the sedan, while Frank and Tom mounted their motorcycles for the ride to Mary's apartment. Mac and Doc prepared to transport Nancy to the Veterans Hospital. The drive back to Eagle Ridge was tense, the twilight casting long shadows across the landscape. Mary rehearsed her role, mentally prepared to be the distraught daughter, confused and angry about her mother's unexplained transfer. The performance needed to be convincing, but controlled enough to keep Blake and Holcomb focused on her rather than suspecting a larger operation. "Nervous?" Dave asked as they approached the town limits. "Terrified," Mary admitted. "But ready." Dave nodded approvingly. "That's the sweet spot. Fear keeps you sharp. Just don't let it paralyze you." Hillside Care Center glowed with fluorescent light against the darkening sky as they pulled into the parking lot. Mary took a deep breath, centering herself for the performance ahead. Dave would remain in the car, monitoring the situation and ready to extract her if necessary. "Showtime," she murmured, stepping out of the vehicle. The automatic doors of Hillside parted before her like the entrance to a battlefield. Mary strode purposefully toward the reception desk, allowing her genuine anxiety to fuel her performance. "I need to see my mother, Nancy Carter, immediately," she demanded of the startled receptionist. "Ms. Carter, I'm not sure," the woman stammered. "Don't tell me you're not sure." Mary raised her voice slightly, drawing attention from nearby staff and visitors. "My mother was a patient here last night. Now I'm hearing rumors about transfers and specialists. Nobody called me. Nobody explained anything. Where is she?" The commotion achieved its intended effect. Within minutes, the floor supervisor appeared, followed shortly by Dr. Perkins himself, his presence confirming his involvement in whatever Blake had planned for Nancy. "Ms. Carter," Perkins began smoothly, his silver hair and kindly demeanor masking whatever darkness lay beneath. "There seems to be some confusion. Your mother was transferred this morning for specialized testing. Surely the nurse called you. A nurse called saying she had another stroke. Mary countered, her voice cracking with genuine emotion. Then I hear from Sheriff Holcomb that she's being transferred. Where is she? Who authorized this? As the confrontation escalated, drawing more spectators, Mary noticed Blake Jr. and Sheriff Holcomb arriving through the main entrance. Perfect timing. They had taken the bait. What's going on here? Holcomb demanded, hand resting meaningfully on his service weapon. Mary turned to him, allowing tears to well in her eyes. My mother is missing, Sheriff. No one will tell me where she's been taken or why. Blake stepped forward, his expression a masterful blend of concern and authority. Mary, please. Let's discuss this calmly. Perhaps Dr. Perkins has the transfer documentation. The doctor shifted uncomfortably. The paperwork came through official channels, State Medical Board authorization. I assume Ms. Carter had been notified. I was not notified. Mary insisted, playing her role perfectly. I want to know where my mother is right now. While Blake, Holcomb, and the medical staff attempted to manage the situation, Mary kept track of the time. 7:15 p.m. Frank and Tom would be entering her apartment now, searching for the hidden compartment in her father's flag case. Blake drew Mary aside, his voice low and menacing beneath the veneer of concern. This is getting out of hand, Mary. Whatever you think you're doing, whatever game you're playing, it's dangerous. I'm not playing games, she shot back. I just want my mother. And I offered to help with her care, Blake reminded her. An offer you rejected. Now she's been moved without authorization, a criminal offense potentially. Mary stood her ground. The transfer orders came through official channels. Dr. Perkins just confirmed it. Blake's facade slipped slightly, revealing the cold calculation beneath. Orders can be forged, paperwork manipulated. Sheriff Holcomb is already investigating potential medical fraud. The threat was clear. They would paint the Brotherhood's rescue as a kidnapping, using legal channels to regain control of Nancy. Mary needed to keep them occupied a while longer, giving Frank and Tom time to secure the documents. If anything happens to my mother, Mary said, her voice low but intense. If she's been harmed in any way because of incompetence or something worse, I'll make sure everyone knows. Blake's eyes narrowed. Careful, Mary. That sounds dangerously like a threat. It's a promise. My father taught me to stand up for what's right. Your father, Blake said dismissively, was a troublemaker who got exactly what he deserved. The admission, casual and cruel, stole Mary's breath. For a moment her performance fell away, replaced by genuine shock and rage. You just confirmed what I suspected. You and your father were responsible for his death. Blake realized his mistake immediately. His hand clamped around her upper arm, fingers digging painfully into her flesh as he pulled her further from the others. You have no idea what you're talking about. No evidence, no witnesses, just the delusions of a waitress with daddy issues. Mary met his gaze steadily, drawing strength from the knowledge that even now her father's evidence was being recovered. You're wrong about that. Just like you were wrong about my mother. She's beyond your reach now. Understanding dawned in Blake's eyes. This wasn't about finding your mother at all. It was a distraction. He looked around sharply, as if expecting to see the Brotherhood emerge from the shadows. What are you really doing, Mary? Before she could respond, her phone buzzed with a text. A quick glance showed a message from Frank. Package secured. Extraction proceeding. Meet at rendezvous. They had the documents. It was time to end the charade. Mary pulled free of Blake's grip. I need to file a missing persons report for my mother's sheriff, she called to Holcomb, who was speaking with Dr. Perkins. Officially, at the station, with witnesses. The public nature of her request put Holcomb in an awkward position. Despite his allegiance to Blake, he had to maintain appearances. That's not necessary right now, Ms. Carter. We'll locate your mother through proper channels. I insist, Mary pressed, moving toward the exit. Unless there's some reason you don't want an official record of her disappearance. Blake and Holcomb exchanged looks, trapped by the bureaucracy they usually manipulated to their advantage. Mary had successfully occupied their attention for nearly 20 minutes, giving the Brotherhood ample time to retrieve the documents and begin their extraction. Fine, Holcomb conceded reluctantly. We can take your statement at the station. I'll drive myself, Mary replied, already heading for the door. I need to check my apartment first in case she tried to call. I'll accompany you. Blake offered his tone, making it clear this wasn't optional. Mary had anticipated this. That won't be necessary, Mr. Blake. This is a family matter. I insist, Blake replied smoothly. These are confusing times. You shouldn't be alone. As they exited Hillside, Mary spotted Dave still waiting in the sedan, watching the interaction carefully. She gave an imperceptible nod, their prearranged signal that she was proceeding to the next phase of the plan. Blake followed Mary to her car, clearly intending to accompany her. This too had been anticipated. The distraction at Hillside was meant to occupy Blake and Holcomb, but they had always known one might follow Mary afterward. "I'll drive," Blake declared, holding out his hand for her keys. "I prefer to drive myself," Mary countered, but Blake's expression hardened. It wasn't a request. Reluctantly, Mary surrendered her keys, aware of Dave watching from across the parking lot. She sent him a subtle hand signal indicating she was proceeding according to the contingency plan. As Blake drove toward her apartment, his demeanor changed from the smooth businessman to something more predatory. "You've made a serious mistake, Mary. Whatever you think you know, whatever evidence you believe exists, is not worth your life." "Is that what you told my father before he died?" Mary asked quietly. Blake's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. "Your father was warned. He chose not to listen. Like daughter, like father, apparently." "My father was a hero." "Your father was a self-righteous fool who didn't understand how the world really works." Blake's voice was cold. "Business requires certain compromises, certain sacrifices. The greater good sometimes demands individual losses." "The greater good?" Mary couldn't hide her disgust. "You mean your family's profit margins?" "We create jobs. We build communities. A few casualties along the way are inevitable." Blake turned onto Mary Street, his expression darkening further. "What exactly are you hoping to accomplish?" "You think some ancient documents your father might have hidden will bring down Blake Enterprises? We have judges, politicians, law enforcement in our pocket. Even if you had evidence, it would disappear before it ever reached a courtroom." Mary remained silent, watching as they approached her apartment building. According to the plan, Frank and Tom should be long gone, the documents safely in their possession. All she needed to do was maintain the pretense long enough to make her own escape at the county line rendezvous. Blake parked in front of the building, turning to face her with an expression that had abandoned all pretense of civility. "Last chance, Mary. Tell me what you and your biker friends are really up to, and perhaps I can be persuaded to be merciful." "I told you. I'm looking for my mother." "Your mother is irrelevant, a means to an end." Blake's cold assessment chilled Mary to the bone. "Tell me what I want to know, or things will become very unpleasant very quickly." Mary reached for the door handle, but Blake activated the central locking system. Trapped. She forced herself to remain calm, remembering the panic button in her pocket. Not yet. She needed to be strategic. "Let's go up to your apartment," Blake suggested with false pleasantness. "Have a more private conversation about your options." Mary's mind raced. Allowing Blake into her apartment was dangerous, but refusing would only escalate the situation. She needed to play along until an opportunity for escape presented itself. "Fine," she agreed reluctantly. Blake unlocked the doors and escorted Mary into the building, his hand firmly gripping her elbow. As they climbed the stairs to her third-floor apartment, Mary mentally cataloged potential weapons and escape routes. The Brotherhood had prepared her for this contingency, but the reality was far more terrifying than the theoretical scenarios they had discussed. At her apartment door, Blake gestured impatiently for her key. Mary complied, watching as he pushed the door open and propelled her inside. The apartment was exactly as she had left it that morning, a fact that immediately struck her as strange. If Frank and Tom had searched for and found the documents in her father's flag case, shouldn't there be some sign of disturbance? Blake closed the door behind them, the click of the lock echoing in the small space. "Now let's talk honestly." His tone had dropped all pretense. "Where are the documents your father stole from Blake Enterprises?" Mary stared at him, genuinely confused. "What are you talking about?" "Don't play dumb. We know Jim Carter took confidential files before he died. We know he hid them somewhere. Your mother's condition was meant to be a message, a warning about what happens to those who cross us." Blake's smile was terrible to behold. "Now your biker friends are helping you recover those files. I want to know where they are." Mary's confusion deepened. If Blake was asking about the documents, did that mean Frank and Tom hadn't found them? Or was this another layer of deception? "I don't know anything about documents," she insisted, backing away from him. Blake advanced slowly, menacingly. "Your father was investigating my family's business practices. He believed he found evidence of impropriety. Before we could reason with him, he had his unfortunate accident. We assumed whatever he'd discovered died with him." His eyes narrowed. "Until your mother started asking questions after his funeral. Then suddenly she too had an unfortunate medical event. The casual admission of his family's involvement in her parents' suffering ignited a rage in Mary that threatened to consume her. "You're monsters," she whispered. "We're businessmen," Blake corrected. "Now this journalist's recording complicates matters, as does your mother's mysterious transfer today. So I'll ask once more, where are the documents?" Mary's gaze inadvertently flicked toward the display case containing her father's burial flag and medals, the hiding place her mother had revealed. Blake caught the movement, his expression changing to triumphant realization. Under old glory. Clever man, your father. He strode to the flag case and examined it carefully. Mary watched in horror as he found the hidden mechanism releasing the false bottom. But instead of documents, all that lay within was a single USB drive. Blake held it up puzzled. Technology adapts. Smart of your father to digitize his evidence. Mary was equally surprised. The physical documents her mother had described must have been converted to digital files at some point, something Nancy might not have known about. But if the USB drive contained the evidence, why hadn't Frank and Tom taken it? Had they missed it somehow? Blake pocketed the drive and turned back to Mary, his expression darkening. Now the question becomes what to do with you. You've proven remarkably troublesome like your father before you. Mary backed away, hands slipping into her pocket to grasp the panic button. Blake advanced, trapping her against the wall. It's unfortunate, really. Another tragic accident in the Carter family. Perhaps carbon monoxide poisoning this time. So common in these old buildings with poor maintenance. Just as Mary prepared to press the panic button, a loud crash echoed through the apartment as the door burst open. Tom and Frank stood in the doorway, expressions grim. "Step away from her," Tom commanded, his voice deadly calm. Blake's surprise quickly morphed into calculation. The cavalry arrives! How predictable! He reached inside his jacket, but before he could withdraw whatever weapon he carried, Frank moved with startling speed for his size, crossing the room and immobilizing Blake's arm in a painful hold. Tom approached Mary. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, relief flooding through her. "The USB drive, he found it." Tom nodded. "We knew he would. That's why we left it." Understanding dawned on Mary. It was a trap. Not exactly. Tom's scarred face revealed a rare smile. "Your father was indeed clever. The real documents were digitized years ago, copies distributed to multiple secure locations. What Blake just found is one decoy among many designed to activate a tracking program the moment it's inserted into a computer." Blake's face contorted with fury as he realized the implications. "You can't prove anything. I have the best lawyers in the state." "We don't need to prove anything in court," Tom replied evenly. "The complete files your father kept records of your illegal activities, environmental violations, bribery, and yes, evidence connecting your family to James Carter's death have already been transmitted to the State Attorney General's office, the FBI, and several major news outlets." Frank added, "Your father's empire is built on corruption, blood, and suffering. By this time tomorrow it will be ashes." Blake struggled against Frank's hold. "You're bluffing. No evidence could be that comprehensive." "Jim Carter was force recon," Tom said simply, as if that explained everything. "He was methodical, thorough, and forward-thinking. He knew the risks he was taking in standing against your family, so he created a dead man's switch. If anything happened to him, the evidence would eventually come to light." The timing was the only thing he couldn't control, Mary realized aloud. He didn't anticipate Mom getting sick before she could activate the switch. Tom nodded. "The Brotherhood became the missing piece of connection protection and the means to finish what your father started." Blake's composure cracked completely. "You're all dead. You understand that my father will ensure none of you live to testify." "Your father has his own problems right now," Frank informed him, tightening his hold when Blake attempted to break free. "State police are executing search warrants on all Blake properties as we speak. The journalist's recording provided the probable cause they needed." Mary felt lightheaded with the sudden reversal. "What happens now?" "Now," Tom said gently, "we get you to the rendezvous point. Your mother is safely at the Veterans Hospital. The documents and recordings are in the hands of authorities who can't be bought or intimidated. And Mr. Blake here gets to experience the consequences of his actions, perhaps for the first time in his privileged life." As if on cue, the sound of sirens approached the building. Not local police, but state troopers whose jurisdiction superseded Sheriff Holcomb's authority. "Perfect timing," Tom remarked. He turned to Blake, his expression hardening. "Honor, courage, commitment. Words that meant something to Jim Carter. Words that will mean something again in Eagle Ridge when your family's grip on this town is broken." Minutes later, Blake was in custody, his protests falling on deaf ears as the evidence against him and his family mounted. Mary watched from the window as he was placed in a state police cruiser, his carefully constructed world of privilege and impunity crumbling around him. "We need to move," Tom urged gently. "The rendezvous is still in effect." Mary nodded, taking one last look at the apartment that had been her sanctuary and prison for so long. Her gaze lingered on her father's flag case, now empty of its secret burden, but somehow more meaningful than ever. "He would be proud of you," Tom said, following her gaze. "Not just for your courage today, but for your integrity every day before this. Caring for your mother, working 2 jobs, never giving up, even when it seemed hopeless. Mary touched the Marine Corps medallion around her neck, feeling a connection to her father stronger than she had in years. I think he sent you here, she said softly. Not literally, but in all the ways that matter. Outside, Dave was waiting with the car engine running. As Mary climbed in, she caught sight of Rose standing across the street watching the commotion with a knowing smile. The older woman raised a hand in silent salute, her expression conveying pride and understanding. The drive to the county line passed in contemplative silence, each person processing the events of the day. At the rendezvous point, Mac was waiting with news that Nancy had been safely admitted to the Veterans Hospital, her condition already improving under proper care. What happens next? Mary asked as they prepared for the final leg of the journey. Tom considered the question seriously. Justice takes time. Trials, testimony, legal proceedings. The Brotherhood will ensure you and your mother remain safe throughout the process. And after, Tom said with gentle understanding, you get to live the life you put on hold. College career, dreams your own, not just survival. Mary hadn't allowed herself to imagine such possibilities for so long that the thought was almost frightening. I'm not sure I remember how to dream anymore. Frank's deep voice rumbled from the front seat. You'll remember. And when you do, the Brotherhood will be there to help make those dreams reality. Scholarship funds, housing assistance, whatever you need. Why, Mary asked, genuinely puzzled by their continued commitment. You've already done so much. You didn't even know my father. We know what he stood for, Tom explained. Honor isn't just a word to us. It's a way of life. Your father lived it. Now we honor his memory by helping his family. As they approached the Veterans Hospital, Mary felt a weight lifting from her shoulders, a burden of fear, uncertainty, and suppressed grief she had carried for years. Ahead lay justice for her father, healing for her mother, and possibilities she had long ago stopped believing in. The Brotherhood of the Road had brought more than just protection and evidence. They had restored her faith in the values her father had lived by, values she had begun to think existed only in memory and in wishful thinking. Honor, courage, commitment, not just words, but principles worth fighting for, worth living for. As they pulled into the hospital parking lot, Mary caught sight of her reflection in the car window. The young woman looking back at her was changed, somehow stronger, more determined, yet somehow lighter as well. Her father's medallion gleamed in the moonlight, a tangible reminder of the legacy she carried forward. Tom held the door for her as they entered the hospital. Ready? He asked simply. Mary nodded, straightening her shoulders. Ready. Together they walked toward the future her father had fought to secure, not just for his family, but for all those who believed that honor still meant something in a world too often ruled by greed and power. In that moment, Mary knew with absolute certainty that she would never again stand alone against injustice, because the Brotherhood, her father's spiritual brothers in arms, would always be their guardians of the values that made life worth living. And somewhere she was certain her father was watching, proud of the daughter who had found the courage to stand tall when it mattered most, just as he had taught her all those years ago.